This is a video to show how arrays can hold objects. In the previous video, what we looked at was how to use them to store integer values, which is a very simple type of data. But now let's look at something a little more complex. So here I've defined a student object. Okay, so here's a class of student. All students have first names, last names, a major, and some overall average mark that they're trying, or that they have achieved. So when we define a new student, we have to pass in their first name, last name, major, and their average. And I've created a couple of methods here. For example, a toString that returns the student's first and last name. Another one returns their major. And this one here returns their average mark. So if I go into, I'm going to create here, I've pre-created a class called the course roster. So in here, I have several students. I have 10 students, apparently all with the name Fred Flintstone. Well, let's change that up a bit. So all my favorite cartoon characters, Barney Rubble. Wilma. Okay. How's that for a name? Bam Bam Rubble. Okay. Don't think we ever got Mr. Slate's first name, but we'll put in Mr. Slate. And Bugs Bunny. Elmer Fudd. Let's see, who else can we put in here? Daffy Duck. And Yosemite Sam. Okay, so here we've now got a bunch of students. They're all in computer studies because it is a very popular and excellent program. And we can see all their marks down the side. So here, all I'm going to do is I'm declaring an array of students, right? So here's my data type, just like with integer, where I put int in the square brackets. Now I'm going to use student with square brackets. So that means give me an array of student objects. I'm going to name my array my class. I could call it my roster, my whatever, my class list, that type of thing. And I'm going to say equals, and student 1, or sorry, student 1000, 10,001, student 10,002, right? So I'm just going to add in these student objects. So now they're in my array. Because they are their objects, I can now actually refer to each of those individually. So imagine if I wanted to get the average grade for the class. Now, in the past, what I would have had to do is actually had to pass in 10 different grades to some method that would calculate the average. But now, because they're all put inside of a container, inside of an array, I can actually just pass in the array my class. So let's just print out the average here. So system.print the class average is, go to 1 decimal place, and I'll say, I'll call it something called average, and in there let's just pass in the array called my class. Now it's going to complain because we haven't defined how this method works yet, so let's do that. This method will okay, so I'm going to say public static. It's going to return a floating point value, and we call it average, and it's expecting a student array, and we can call it the class. Again, it doesn't have to have the exact same name because we're passing this array over. So in this case, What do we want to do? Well, we'll set a total, a variable called total to start. And then what we want to do is we're going to loop through our array. So I'm going to say for now the reason that I always say index is less than the class dot length versus just saying less than 10 is that I want to keep this dynamic. So if the class had 11 students or 50 students, I don't want to have to come back in here and change code in different methods. I want my methods to be as generic as possible. So in this case, I'm just going to receive an array of students, and I'm going to get them to give me their grades, and I'm going to figure out the average. So I'm going to say the total is equal to whatever the total was previously plus, and here I'm going to say the class at position index dot get average. Right? So if I go back to my student object, the get average method will return whatever their average is. So if I look in my roster, what it'll do now is it'll go to each student and it'll say, what's your average? What mark do you have? And then here I can just say, well, return. Again, I'm going to cast this as a float. Return the total divided by the amount of elements in our array. So let's run that. It says right away, our class average is 76.6%. So it works really well. And we didn't have to redefine our method if we have 10 students, 11 students, 100 students. Right? We can just reuse our method over and over again. So as an example, let's add one more student here. Uncle Sam. And Uncle Sam got a 56. I'm just going to add him into our array here. Okay. So now if I rerun our program, now our average has changed. So it's very easy to scale this, right? I can change my array and I can now reuse methods such as average. Now what if I wanted to print the class roster to the screen? You know, who's in my class? So here, let's just set up a little simple for loop. The idea is I want to iterate through each position in the array. So if we go back to this array, you know, in each of these positions, instead of a number now, I have a student object. So I could ask them to give me their name. I could say, you know, student.toString, because there's a method in our student object that, here we go. So when I say, you know, toString, it'll return their first and last name. So let's use that. So I'm going to set up a loop here. Index is less than, what did we call our class? My class. Again, I'm going to use the length of the array instead of hard coding it to some fixed number. And you do not need to call it index. A lot of people call it just I. You could call it counter. You could call it position. You can call the variable whatever you want, as long as you're consistent in how you call it. I like index because that's the proper name of, this is index 0, index 1, index 2. Okay, so system.if.println, and all we have to do now is we have our array, so I can say my class at position index, and then here I can see, well, what methods are available to me. Well, I have this toString method, right, which will return the first and last name. So let's run that. And maybe it'd be better if we say something in front here. So here we go. So let's look at it. So now it's nice. It says class average is 74.7, and oh, terrible English. The list below is the class register. All right, let's look at that. That's a little nicer. Okay, so we can see each of our students. So Fred, Barney, Wilma, right? So we can see them all. We can see our average. So all that the array is doing, again, is it's a container that holds all of our objects. Okay, I hope that clarifies a little bit in terms of what's going on with arrays. Again, the way that we reference each position in an array is by its relative position, or sorry, its absolute position. So, you know, this is whatever the contents are in position 0. This is whatever the contents are in position 1. One of the more common errors with arrays is that sometimes people, see here I'm going to go from 0 up to just below the length of the array, right? So in this case, it'd be between 0 and 3. There's 4 positions, but we start counting at 0, so it'd be 0, 1, 2, 3. One of the common things is if I now refer to position 4, well, position 4 doesn't exist. So you'll get an error called array out of bounds. So if I put in here, go up to, say, 13, if I go to run this, I'm going to get an array index out of bound exception. So if you see that, all that it means is that you've likely referenced a position in the array that does not exist. So just try to keep it nice and safe and use this, this nice little format of my class. And that way you can't miss. Okay, I hope you enjoyed that. A simple little overview of creating objects, right? We created student objects. We've assigned those student objects to an array, and then we've cycled through the array to create an average and our class roster. All right, thanks very much.